Hello everyone, I'm Sophie and I'm currently at Kechara Forest Retreat, Bentong, Malaysia. And this is the book that I'll be reading from, Tales My Lama Told Me by Pastor David Lai. And the tales within were related by our Guru, His Eminence, the 25th Sam Tuku Rinpoche. Today I'll be reading from chapter 4, Spiritual Revolution. And as usual, before I go to that, I'll share a picture. There you go. Chapter 4, Spiritual Revolution, page 37. Many years ago, I watched a movie called Kundung with Rinpoche. It is an epic movie of the current Dalai Lama's life before he went into exile in India. The movie moved me to tears with its poignant portrayal of the young Dalai Lama who was forced to take on responsibilities far beyond his age. The movie left a lasting impression in my mind, and I began doing extensive research on him, particularly on the history of his predecessor. Rinpoche would tell us tales of the Dalai Lama, which he would weave into his teachings. I rediscovered this precious story about the third Dalai Lama in a transcript of one of Rinpoche's teachings. When the descendant of Genghis Khan, the great Altan Khan, traveled from Mongolia to Tibet, his main intention was to plunder Tibet. As he was traveling near Lhasa, he met a monk who seemed exceptionally serene and compassionate in his demeanor. The great Altan Khan was impressed and thought, this monk is exceptional. I wonder who his teacher is. Altan Kang demanded, who is your guru? Tell me or I will kill you. My esteemed guru is His Holiness Gelwa Sonam Gyatso, was the monk's calm reply. Today, this monk's teacher is better known as the third Dalai Lama. After his incursion into Tibet, the great Kang returned to Mongolia and sent an emissary to Lhasa with a request. In your great compassion, please come to Mongolia to teach the Dharma. If you don't, I will kill and conquer your people. After much deliberation, the Dalai Lama sent a reply agreeing to the great Kang's reply. He decided to comply not because he was afraid for his own life, but because he feared what the Mongol would do to his people should he not agree. At that time, the Dalai Lama, with his great clairvoyance and compassion, knew that the time was opportune to convert and change the hardened ways of the northern people. The Dalai Lama and his entourage made preparations to travel up to Mongolia. Traveling at that time was a far cry from what it is today. It would have meant stocking up on supplies and riding for months on the backs of animals such as camels, mules, yaks, or horses. There were no paved roads that led up north, and traversing the dirt roads was risky, lined with bandits and spirits waiting to trap the unsuspecting travelers. His Holiness and his entourage began their great journey north. It took them several years to even reach the border because they had to stop at each village along the way for His Holiness to give teachings and conduct rituals for the people. When they finally arrived at the Mongolian border, the great Altan Khan was waiting and had set up a huge tent as a traditional Mongolian custom to honor the arrival of His Holiness. It was also a display of the great Khan's power and leadership. He came out of his tent to receive His Holiness and his entourage, and wearing white robes which symbolized his pure dedication to the Dharma. However, the Dalai Lama was again threatened by Altan Khan, who demanded, show me your powers. If you cannot do it, you must be a fake and I will have to kill you. His Holiness went to a river near the tent, stared down at it intensely. The water began to flow backwards, and as it did, His Holiness picked up a conch shell and blew it. The sound of the conch shell resounded far and wide, and the earth shook. This act was later interpreted to be a sign that the Dharma would pervade over this land and would tame the hearts and minds of the people. Immediately, the Kang fell to his knees and took refuge under the Dalai Lama. From that day on, the great Kang became a faithful disciple of the Dalai Lama. One of his first acts of honoring his teacher was to bestow him with the title Dalai Lama. In Mongolia, Dalai means ocean. It also refers to the Dalai Lama's own incarnation name, Gyatso, which means ocean in Tibetan. This name was also used by the Tatars, who were closely related to the Mongols when they invaded China. Thus, the Dalai Lama's name was famous throughout the Far East and was eventually even adopted by the British and the Americans, who popularized it. However, through times, the Tibetans had preferred to use their own epithet, such as Kundung, the presence, or Je Tamche Khenpa, omniscient master. Eventually, Tibet began to establish its spiritual authority over all of Mongolia. That was how Mongolia became the sponsor and guardian of Dharma. While Tibet became its spiritual teacher, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama the supreme spiritual teacher for all of Mongolia. This is why Mongols residing in the inner, outer, and former Russian republics, such as Kalmykia, are mainly Buddhists today, thanks to the kindness of the Dalai Lama. All of this arose from a simple monk's demeanor, which has brought millions onto the path of the Dharma and led many out of negative situations. In his first discourse, the Dalai Lama spoke about the non-virtues of killing to convert the bloodthirsty ways of his listeners. At that time, Mongolians worshipped shamanistic gods, the practices of which included animal sacrifices. They would often kill animals and offer up blood and flesh to appease these gods, especially the gods of fire and war. They also often subscribed to a Mongolian tradition of sacrificing a certain numbers of animals, wives, and servants when a man dies, depending on his rank and when alive. When he began teaching the Mongolians, the Dalai Lama prohibited all forms of animal and human sacrifices and instead advised the Mongolians to offer a portion of the deceased's possessions to the monasteries, temples, or religious causes, along with virtuous prayers and aspirations. In addition, he also taught the Mongolians to stop their pillaging of China, Tibet, and various parts of Mongolia. In general, he told them to strive in ways of goodness by advocating the Buddha's teachings. However, the Dalai Lama also understood that centuries of following a shamanistic, bloodthirsty culture could not be changed overnight. He also observed that the divinities that were associated with war, violence, and fire seemed to appeal to the Mongols. He realized that it would not be possible for him to begin teaching compassion to warlike people. Instead, he gradually introduced elements and practices from Buddhism, such as the practice of propitiating wrathful deities like Mahakala, as the Mongolians could accept and relate to his fierce appearance. Despite Mahakala's apparent wrathfulness, he is actually an emanation of the Buddha of compassion, Avalokiteshvara. Therefore, his nature is of extreme compassion, like that of a mother fiercely protecting her child. Mahakala is fierce with three bulging black eyes looking up into the sky and sharp teeth that surround a tongue which rolls and darts like lightning. His 6 arms hold 6 different weapons and implements which represent the 6 perfections of generosity, patience, ethics, joyous efforts, meditative concentration, and wisdom. He wears a necklace of human heads around his neck with a tiger skin loincloth. He stands amid fierce flames and upon an emanation of himself in a form of the elephant-headed god, who symbolizes the destruction of obstacles. This Buddhist deity was ideal for the Mongols at the time as he represented everything that they were familiar with. In this case, Mahakala's wrathful emanations of compassion was perfect for subjugating and controlling the aggressive, warlike tendencies of the Mongolian people. After abolishing the practices of human and animal sacrifice, the Mongolians began to offer ritual cakes called tormas instead, which the Dalai Lama taught them to make and offer. The actual offering is made up only of yogurt, milk, flour, barley, honey, sugar, and butter, kneaded into cakes and painted red to look like flesh and blood. The offerings or tormas are meant specifically for wrathful deities and visualized to be the flesh and blood of butchered beings, symbolic emanations of their delusions and negativities. After giving many teachings, initiations, and establishing temples and monasteries throughout the country, the Dalai Lama left Mongolia with a promise to the great Khan that he would return. On the way back to Lhasa, the Dalai Lama entered clear light meditation and passed away. The fourth Dalai Lama, Gelwa Yonten Getso, took rebirth as the grandson of Elton Kang in Mongolia, which was to be the only non-Tibetan incarnation of the Dalai Lama. He thus fulfilled his promise to return to Elton Kang. The boy was eventually brought from Mongolia to Lhasa and enthroned as the fourth Dalai Lama, the great Gelwa Yonten Getso. All of Mongolia was converted because of a single monk's true practice. From Altan Kang's singular chance meeting with him, Mongolia was completely converted onto the path of Buddhism, revealing to us how history can be totally altered by just one kind person's action and compassion. And with that, that's the end of my sharing from chapter 4. So as you can see, and as mentioned, from a single monk's action, where Altan Kang met with him, can bring about the Dharma to the whole of Mongolian. And so we should never underestimate what we can do with a single act of kindness or compassion that could change and just spread, So as such, we should always be mindful of our actions to benefit others. And thank you for sharing your time with me. And we'll end this with a completion dedication in Tibetan. Jangjub Sencho Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ge Yushi, Ke Panam Pame Payang, Goni Gondo Pewashu, Toni Toa Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ge Yushi, Ke Panam Pame Payang, Goni Gondo Pewashu, Daso Jini Sapage Wadi, Tantandro Agonaka Padang, Jepa Jesu no Santrapai, Tamping Imporindo Sa Se, Sho, Ke Wakuntu Yandalamada, Dromi Choki Palano Choching, Sadam Nangi Yate Razone, Doje Changi Ngopangatusu, Ge Wadi, Yududa, Lama Sang Yudruyone, Drewachi Malupa, De Salago Pasho, Choki Kya Posungapa, Chosunampa Pewala, Geki Samasiwada, Tungi Malu Sangwasho, Dadam Sengi Dusundam, Drewe Songi Latini, Gewa Losantrapai, Tampayu Riva, Gyushi. Ni modele sendele, ni mingu nyandele shi, ni sentatu dele pao, kunchu sungi jingilo, kunchu sungi ngodruso, kunchu sungi trasi, sho, jesu nama kusen rapting ching, nam katrini chocho ke padang, lo sam tempe dromi sap sungi, droe mun satatu ni gyushi, gangri rawe kowe shinkam den, pendan dewa malu gyoine, charan se wan tense get soyi, shape shire baru den gyushi. Home tomping odro malupa, then de dala sauduso, kodan den pa long chot na, ke pa so shik shukten sell. Thank you again for joining me, and please join me again for my next session as I read more chapters from this book.